Good morning, you guys, and happy Wednesday. Here's a warm-up. Go ahead and pause this video and give it a try, and then when you're ready, unpause it, and I will show you the answers. All right, so number one, we're converting the degree measurements into radians. Don't forget, please leave your answers in terms of pi. Don't make them a decimal, okay? So if we're looking at 30 degrees, the formula is radians equals degrees times pi over 80. So I'm going to do 30 times pi over 180. So technically what that turns into is 30 times pi over 180. And all I need to do is reduce 30 over 180. So I have a graphing calculator where I can just hit math, fraction, enter, and it does it for me. A lot of you guys are already aware of that. Some of your scientific calculators have that option too. And so I get pi over 6 radians. If we do the same thing with 150, I have to reduce 150 over 180. And that gives me 5 pi over 6. Okay, for the last two, we're doing the same thing, just using the going the other direction. If we want to convert into degrees, we need to do radians times 180 over pi. The reason for that is, and the way I kind of remember which one is which, is that to go from radians to degrees, we need to cancel pi. So that's kind of how I remember it's the 180 over pi versus the ones up at the top were pi over 180. So I get 180 over 4, which when I divide that off to the side of my calculator, I know you can't see that, I get 45 degrees. Last one, change from radians into degrees, the pi cancels. So 7 times 180 on the top is 1,260. And then when I go to divide by 6, I get 210 degrees. All right, when you are ready, go ahead and move on to the next, let's move on to the next concept. All right, so angles are formed by an initial side and a terminal side. Those are kind of vocabulary words. An initial side is said to be in standard position when its vertex is located at the origin and the ray goes along the positive x-axis. So here's a picture of what I'm talking about here. So the initial side is almost always going to be that line right there. Okay, at least when it comes to what we're going to be talking about with trig concepts, okay? So the initial side is always that little piece. And then the terminal side is wherever the angle is located. So in this case, that terminal side is this part right here, letting you know this is the angle that I'm focusing on, is that piece right there. You can also have the terminal side be in a lot of different quadrants. You'll see off to the side here, I've got the 4 quadrants labeled. It's been a long time since we've talked about the 4 quadrants. You probably haven't seen this since like back in middle school. Basically, the best way to remember it is this quadrant right here is the one we use the most in math, science, statistics, biology, lots of other mediums that I can't even really think of any more examples right now, but mostly math and science. So we call this one quadrant 1. And then basically when we're talking about the other names of the quadrants, then it just goes counterclockwise. So quadrant 2, 3, and 4. SAT actually, usually there's at least one question that's asking about which quadrant is this coordinate point in or something like that. Or maybe the question includes the 4 quadrants. So it's kind of good to refresh while we're doing this lesson. An angle measure is measured by the amount of rotation from the initial side to the terminal side. So here's the part that's a little bit different. A positive angle is made by the rotating counterclockwise. So right here's that initial side right here. And notice how it's rotating counterclockwise, and that's how it's a positive angle. Versus a negative angle starts with that same exact terminal side, but notice how it's rotating clockwise. That makes it a negative angle measurement, okay? So let's do a couple practice problems. Convert negative 45 degrees into radians. Up to this point, negative 45 degrees was not a thing. Like even in geometry, it was just, no, it's 45 degrees. When we're talking about trigonometry, though, you can have negative angle measures based on which direction you're looking at, okay? So negative 45 degrees into radians is the same thing as what we did in our warm-up, right? I need to multiply by pi over 180 to turn it into radians. So I get negative 45 pi over 180. Off to the side of my calculator, I'm reducing that fraction, which is just 1/4. So it's negative pi over 4 radians. So draw negative 45 on a coordinate grid. So here's just a blank XY axis coordinate grid. Because it's negative, here's my initial side. And because it's negative, I'm going to go downwards, making my angle kind of look like this. So it's kind of this direction. Usually I draw the arrow right there as well to help. And then you might see it as maybe the degree measurement is out here. You can also see it as radians on the edge of the line. So it just kind of depends on what the diagram's looking for. All right, let's do the same thing with 60 degrees. If you want to give it a try on your own, you can pause the video at this point in time and see how you do before I show you the answer. All right, so 60 degrees is times pi over 180 is 60 pi over 180. When I reduce 60 divided by 180, I get 1/3. So in radians, it's pi over 3. So draw 60 degrees on a coordinate grid. Again, here's my initial side. My terminal side, 60 degrees is like, I don't know, ish, right here. And I draw my little arrow reminding me that it's a positive angle measure. And it's 60 degrees or pi over 3 radians. So just something like that. You don't have to, you can label it at the end of the terminal side like I did with pi over 3, or you can label it on the inside like I did with the 60 degrees. Does not matter. As long as you know what that angle measure is, I'm good with you. All right, what if we're doing the other direction? So convert 3 pi over 2 radian into degrees. Okay, so here's my radians. If I want to convert into degrees, I multiply by 180 over pi. So the pi's cancel. 3 times 180 is 540, and 540 divided by 2 is 270 degrees. So here's where it gets a little bit tricky. It is a positive angle measure. So when I go to draw this and label it, here's my initial side. This right here is 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and here is 270 right here. So what I need to do is I have to draw that line, because otherwise, if I just draw this ray right here and this initial one right here, it just looks like negative 90 degrees. So I have to notate with this arrow right here, no, I'm looking at positive 270, not negative 90, okay? Then you can either label, right, the 270 degrees, or you can also label it as that 3 pi over 2, depending on whether you're talking about degrees or radians. So why don't you try this next one, pause the video, and then when you're ready, you can unpause it and see if you're on the right track. All right, so negative 7 pi over 3 multiplied by 180 over pi. The pi's are going to cancel, and 7 times 180, that gets me negative 1,260. When I divide by 3, I get negative 420 degrees. So this one's a little bit trickier because there's only 360 degrees in a circle. So it's like, okay, how am I supposed to notate that, right? Well, start with your initial side, and we're going to go this all the way around gives me 360, right? So 420 degrees minus 360, I still have 60 degrees left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in as if it were 60 degrees to begin with, and I'm going to end my arrow right here. So notice how I start. Here's 90, 180, 270, 360, all the way up to 420, okay? Now, here's the problem with what I just did. You notice how it's a negative degree measure? I just screwed this up because I went the positive direction, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to erase this, try this again. We all make mistakes, right? So here's my initial side. I want to go the other direction. So here we go. Here's negative 360. So here will be negative 420. Okay, negative 420 degrees, or negative 7 pi over 3 radians, however they want you to label it. Okay. All right, so the only other option you might have for your homework assignment today is what if you're given the diagram and you need to find the angle measure? So here's what I mean by that. Here's a diagram. They're labeling that the green section right here is 4 pi over 4. So technically, if you were looking for that angle, you'd be like, oh, sweet, my answer is negative pi over 4 radians. Problem solved. But notice the arrow they're giving you, okay? They want you to find the angle measure of this piece right here. So first thing I notice is because I started drawing downwards, this is going to be a negative angle measure. I know that much. I also know that up to this point right here is 360 degrees. So my answer should be a larger number than 360, okay? So there's a couple different things you can do. My recommendation is trying to figure this out in radians is kind of tough. So I think my first step would be to change pi over 4 into degrees. So if I do that, pi over 4 times 180 over pi, that turns into 45 degrees, okay? So that little section's 45 degrees. So I'm thinking, okay, if this first section right here was 360, this other little section's 45, 360 degrees plus 45 degrees is going to give me 405 degrees. So I would write my answer like this. Now, having said that, though, one thing I'll talk to you guys about in the next slide is on your homework assignment, if it's given to you like they gave us pi over 4, I'd prefer the answer to stay as radians. So if that's the case, go one extra step and change your degree measure into radians. So pi over 180, 405 divided by 180 as a fraction is 9/4. So technically my answer would be -9/4 because they gave it to me in radians to begin with, okay? So you'll notice that on the homework assignment, if they give you the degree in radians, the answer is in radians. If they give the degree as degrees, then write your answer as degrees, okay? All right, so today you have your second official assignment for remote learning. Okay, don't forget you can print it out and then send a copy and paste it to Google Classroom, or you can do it on a separate sheet of paper. That's totally fine. I know it's kind of tough when we're doing graphs and things like that, but this one is very bare bones. You don't have to have actual grid lines, so you should be okay. A couple notes real quick. Number one, skip numbers 7 through 10 on the first page when you see the assignment. That's not something that I think is very vital to what we're learning. So we're just going to skip those 4 questions, okay? And then number 2 is just talking about, don't forget, if the question's in radians, leave your answer in radians. If the question's in degrees, write your answers in degrees. And if you need to convert and then convert back, that's okay. Just like this last one we did, I needed to convert into degrees to kind of wrap my head around the answer. And then I took my answer and wrote it, like converted it back into radians. That's totally okay. It's completely up to you. All right, good luck, you guys. Don't forget, if you have questions, stop by and see me for office hours, or you can send me an email if you need something clarified. Good luck.